Welcome to the Howie and Beastmode podcast, where we discuss all things business, including growth, strategy, and execution, as well as personal and professional development. Let's join Howie and Beastmode in conversation.
What is going on, Beastmode? Welcome to my humble house here, and it's nice to see you in your house.
Yeah, I only wish this was my house. This is an office that I get to use, but it's always great. Howie, this is the highlight, not just of my Tuesday, but of every week. So excited.
It's always nice talking about growth and business development and branding and strategy and career stuff and all kinds of good stuff. So thanks for hopping on. Well, where are we at? We're in a series. Can you give us a little idea of what's happening with the series?
Yeah. So today is episode 6 in our Stretching for Growth series. And if you haven't caught all 6, I thoroughly implore you to go back and check them all out. You don't have to listen to them in order, but you can definitely see the passion and the thoughts in sequential order if you'd like to, because they did come to us that way. Not sure what the reason is behind it, but God does. And today we're really just expounding on our conversation from last week. So last week we talked about research, hyper tailoring, and we really dipped a baby toe in storytelling. And today we're going to devote an entirety to storytelling and how that relates to sales. And we have some really key objectives, and we also have some real personal touches. And so we hope that you guys can sit down, take a moment, and really soak it in.
Awesome. Well, I ran a startup a few years ago in 2010. So I had this idea in 2007 that I wanted to honor some people that made a difference in my life. So I had a particular boss who wouldn't let me quit. I was really discouraged at work, and he wouldn't let me quit. His name is Lee Wilson, actually. And you guys can find him on LinkedIn if you want, or Facebook. But I worked for him at CompUSA. And he really made a difference in my life because I was discouraged one day and he wouldn't let me quit. And he actually said to me, not only do I think you can do more than what you're doing for us right now, I think you could run my department. And because of those words, it became like a ripple in my life. And I actually did go out for that role when it was up. And I actually did run his department as he moved up the food chain. And so, that's an example of a story that's close to my heart and that changed my life. And so I think what we're talking about today, we'll go through a couple more examples later. But if you think about that story right there and what a difference, we all have someone who made a difference in our life, right? So I took that idea and I started a website called To Honor Them, where you could honor people who made a difference in your life. And I had people trying to fund it. I had people trying to give me money. I had 2 different people trying to give me money. I had universal agreement on that being a good idea to go develop that site. And that's because of why? Because of my stories. So I think that tells you when I've got people willing to fund me and give me money, and I've got people that are rallying around me to support that effort at the time, based on a couple of simple, stories about people who, that I wanted to honor. It made people think about in their own life, people who they wanted to honor. The site didn't work out. I feel like I was a better builder than a promoter, and I might have misjudged the audience as well. But the lesson is super critical that a story can move people. And so we want to talk a little bit this week about how, whether you're trying to get funding for your startup, or you're trying to raise money for a nonprofit, or you're trying to sell because you're in sales, or you're in marketing and you're trying to build your brand and build leads and all of that. All of these great reasons are, and so many more that I didn't mention, are reasons why you want to be able to have a story and provide stories in your approach. So yeah, I'm excited about the series, Beast Mode, and I'm super glad to get started. So I think it'd be helpful if we told the guys and gals, a few ideas, and we won't try to encompass everything. But what are some ideas of where in their sales and marketing and business development effort and everything else, where are some ideas where they can get their stories?
Yeah, so first and foremost, everyone has a story. Every business has a story. Every individual has a story. And so before that thought even comes up in your head of, I don't have a story, I'm letting you know right now you do. Everybody does. And so that's what we're going to go right into. So the first one is that we have on our list is, as a business, you have a customer testimonial, customer success, or even just a customer journey from start to finish. Maybe I'll touch on that idea a little bit later of taking a customer through the journey. That's a huge one if you're a business owner. Everybody talks about testimonials, reviews, things like that. But if you're able to tell that story effectively, then I mean it's a huge win to share that story after you do so.
That's good. If you think about the business model that Yelp has, or that Google Reviews has, or some of the review sites that are out there, that's what you're benefiting from. Is you're benefiting from that social story, and you're kind of tapping into that social trust of, hey, they had a good story, they had a good experience, and when I read their story, it made me trust that brand, and so I wanted to buy from them as well. So that's what entire businesses are built on: storytelling, and sort of the feeling of trust that you get after having a story like that. So whether it be Yelp or somebody else. So yeah, I think customer testimonials are a great one. I think, and we're going to give some illustrations in a little bit after we cover some ideas. So we'll both tell you some stories, and mine actually covers a customer testimonial. Another one is an industry story. So an industry story could be something, and I'll just give you one. When I was in a cybersecurity world, I created a presentation for a series of events. I had, 6 events, 5 in-person events and 1 virtual event. And I used this content. I created this content. And I actually did some research in the cybersecurity world of who in Dallas was a famous name that had actually been hacked, so that if they would have taken preventative steps, they wouldn't have been hacked. And so I was able to find names and put their logo and tell a little story about that. So the story, we talked about a customer testimonial story a second ago, but now this one is an industry story. And so it can be, you kind of use this type of story to paint the need in general. Cybersecurity is kind of an easy one, but there could be others. For example, there might be a type of vertical that some of our listeners deal with where they're always trying to help customers contain costs for, their insurance costs, or for example. And so, there might be that. But in an industry story helps your customer become aware of their need, because you're talking about what their peers need, and they have that relatability. So
Yeah.
that's an industry story.
Yeah, another good example of an industry story is CarMax. So they're telling the story of nobody likes the haggling, nobody likes the used car salesman guy. Nobody likes that. You know what we don't do? We don't do that. So I'm telling the negative story of the industry, and I'm saying not like that. No haggling. This is our price, start to finish. Blah blah blah.
Beautiful. That is absolutely perfect example of an industry story right there. The reason I like that better than my example is because you use an industry pain, an industry story, but you tied it to a brand. So that was really outstanding. And then I think telling a why story for your organization. So, so Beastmode and I always have a prep session, and we talked about Tom's Shoes. And Tom's Shoes has a fairly famous story and strategy. I actually don't know the backstory, so I'm not going to pretend I know that. But the way they go to market is that if you buy a pair of shoes, they give a pair of shoes. And there's a few other socially oriented brands out there that do similar types of things. There's Grace and Lace, which does I think socks down in Austin, and they funded all these different they were on Shark Tank. They have funded all these different orphanages and schools in India, by the way. So a really cool brand that does that as well. But the why story, for your organization. So this is an organizational level why story. So that could be something like, you really have a passion. You notice that small businesses were neglected. Like actually Beastmode and I do, by the way, that we actually do notice that small businesses are very neglected. So some things that we're working on actually are oriented to small businesses. Even this podcast, to be honest with you, is the fruit of our passion of how we feel that everybody goes after GE and Ford, and nobody's going after this little firm that's got, 75 employees or 12 employees or 150 employees. No one's trying to help them with best practices. So our podcast is actually kind of focused on that kind of market, kind of informally, but it's because it's neglected. And so that might be the why for our podcast. That might be the why for certain organizations. But every large organization or small or medium should have a why story for their organization. Like, why'd you do this? Like, this is a lot of work. Why wouldn't you just go take a job? Why'd you do this?
Yeah. And not to cut to the chase too quickly, but your why story is not making money. If that's your why story, your customers are going to know very quickly.
That's good. That's smart. That's great. Yeah. If you're, you better have something more than, I want to generate money for me. Like that's not a very, why does that resonate with a customer? You know what I mean? Why would that resonate? That's a great point. Yeah. Have a why story.
And the last one that we were going to cover is a personal why story. So we always try to talk, and I know I do try to spend a lot of time on the personal side. So there is the business that you're either working for, working in, leading, managing, directing, whatever, but there's always the individual side. Your individual why is important just as much. And it goes back to the same weightiness of why the customer's why is important. Not only because future customers can relate to it, but your personal why, it attracts, let's just say peers to come work alongside you. It also, if you ever heard our discussion on branding, personal brands uplift your business brand. So you can't have them separate. They need to elevate each other. And so your personal why are you working for Nike? Why are you working for Tom's? Are you there to collect a check? If you are, they probably know about it, but if you're there to make a difference and because you see what their organization is doing, that you created buy-in, and it's
awesome. Yeah, it's interesting. You might say, well, why do I want to feature my employee with their why? And the reason why is because they're not just buying your brand, they're buying from employees. And if your employee is able to articulate a why, think about what that says about you.
Yeah, the more that you can associate your business to individuals, the tighter the bond is between you and the customer. If I'm buying a product from Target, but I see the people behind Target, then it creates this connection to me that makes me want to shop at Target. Versus if I'm just seeing, it as a commodity that I'm just going and picking up, and then what it does is it makes it disposable, or I don't want that. I want you to see when you buy this product or buy this service or buy this whatever it is from this company, you see Jim in the back, the one who's busting his butt for his kids. That's who you see, and it creates a connection that's much deeper.
That's good. It's interesting you mentioned Target. There was a funny story that happened probably 5 years ago, I would say, maybe 4 years ago, about Target. There was some, teenage girls that took a picture of this young guy somewhere in DFW named Alex. Remember this?
Yeah, Frisco.
Was it Frisco? Yeah. And I guess they thought this was a cute, guy or whatever. And so they took a picture and maybe they put it on Instagram or Facebook. I don't really know where they put it, but it went viral, and it was it was just Alex from Target. And he ended up getting some notoriety and stuff like that. And actually had a little bit of a career. We know the family who actually managed him, which is really funny that you would know that person. I don't know where his career is at now, but yeah, it was it got Target some incredible free publicity. The fact that went viral, but it was just a personal story of some girls who thought this young man was cute. And that's just a fun story. It's relatable. It's fun. it went a little bit viral. So yeah, featuring your employees, and in this case, Target got lucky. They didn't have to feature their employees. But there's something that's so real about that. That's the interaction. I have two girls, and there's something so real about the interaction of them noticing that, or sharing, or whatever it is. So that's a fun story. But I had to bring it up because of your Target story. But yeah, I mean, I would be so interested in. Let me think about an example for my career. Just knowing an employee. I can't think of one right now, so I won't spend any more time trying. I can't think of an example right now for my own personal career. Okay, hang on. I just thought of one. I'm going to give it to you. Trust me, it's worth your time. Okay. Well, I used to do interviews at a Tom Thumb grocery store. It was right near my office. It's like 2 blocks down. They had a Starbucks in there. And as you know, if you're in DFW, a lot of the Tom Thumbs, maybe all of them, have a Starbucks inside. They're not real comfortable. Wood chairs, circle tables, loud store, not the best environment. But I could go have my coffee and meet with candidates that I was interviewing for their first interview and do these screens there. So as I had gone to over in Plano, this particular Tom Thumb for interviewing different sales candidates, I noticed that Emily, who was the like a supervisor of that little Starbucks, how diligent she was. And she, I saw her do some things that were above and beyond for the store or for customers. I don't remember the situation. I just remember the character that I saw in her. And so I had a new role come up for an associate salesperson. And an associate salesperson was this new thing I was trying to develop, where it was like I could hire very limited or no experience, but then I would train them and I'd give them a little bit of responsibility and prove it out and give them a chance. It's basically the whole idea was we get somebody on a bargain, but they get a chance in the corporate world in sales. And so she would not interview. I asked her, I said, Emily, you're so committed, you're so faithful, you're so diligent, and you're smart. Is there any way you'd interview for this new associate role? And I had to convince her. She wouldn't do it. And eventually she agreed to interview for it. And we hired her she was the first person who was an associate territory account manager. And I had her calling a couple of thousand of our smaller accounts. And I taught her, I gave her phone script. I trained her. I sat with her. I gave her email templates. I tried to give her a cookbook so that, because she was new at this. She ended up doing very well with that. And she was a real good, again, I spotted the character in Starbucks. And I know it sounds funny, but character applies anywhere. In fact, you guys, if you guys are Bible readers, you might know the scripture that says, if a person is faithful in a few things, he'll be faithful in many things. And that's certainly the case with Emily. She ended up running a $5 million Microsoft account for me. She kind of co-ran it with an outside salesperson. But if you think about that, like this is like literally almost a Cinderella story where it was truly someone was discovered. And so that's a great, that puts a face. You guys probably won't forget that story. So that is an example for my career of how having a why for your employees can also be an effective thing too. And I think you just have to ask for those. If you're not aware of any, how flattering would it be to your employees, that is, to go say, hey, what's your why? Like, why is this why does this job resonate with you? I think you'd be so encouraged if you listen to your employees like that and if they were able to tell you their why.
Yes. Not only would it be flattering, I'm sure, if you're not doing that, it's essential that you start doing that. You need to understand your employees and what makes them tick. Motivators like money are generally not the reason. They may be working their butt off for a vacation, and it's not the money, it's for the kids. The kids need this. My spouse is sick, that's why I'm working this. And the more I can relate to that, not only can I share that story, but it makes me a better leader, better team player, all of it.
Wow, that's good. Those are just those two examples that you just gave even were, those kind of, flickered. I could see why that would, even those two examples would resonate with me personally. So yeah, good examples. Well, we're going to give you guys a couple of story examples. So I'm going to start off first. The story example is one that you guys would be able to relate to, I think. there's a small company in Fort Worth that was acquired by a really big fringe company, but they were kind of kept independent in Fort Worth. So I called on these guys when I was selling cybersecurity, and they ended up making a purchase of our cybersecurity monitoring service, where we would basically try to detect hacking activity that was coming against them and stop it, right? And warn them and all that. So Alan bought my solution from me, and I trained him, and I tried to be a really good account manager to make him successful. And then he ended up actually buying more later. So the relationship was growing. But we had actually some examples. It was the summer of 2017. One of his employees was going through a divorce, and she had an email that came to her that was a phishing email. And what a phishing email, it means in the cybersecurity world, is they're trying to trick you. That's what a phishing email is. It's fake. It's the trickery. They want you to click on something, because if you click, then they got in. Okay. And so this lady was getting divorced, and the email came out that said your divorce documents. So it's kind of perfect trick, perfect timing, the right audience. And so she did click on that. The system that I sold them detected that in no kidding in seconds, and alerted them immediately of high risk of what was happening. And they were able to stop that from creating bleed over infection all over the company. And they also were able to warn customers who they suspected would be under a similar attack, which apparently they were, and they helped some customers through that. But our solution detected them in seconds. And Alan actually gave me a couple of stories like that. And if you think about the power of that, a real human story like that, where it was literally a successful hack that would have just possibly, spread throughout their entire company and done untold damage. And you think about how successful that was. I've been able to tell that story multiple times that has inspired people to understand how we could help them. So there's my personal example of a customer testimonial. And then I think Beastmode has a story that's entirely different, because we wanted to illustrate to you guys that your stories have a lot of power.
Yeah. And so the example that I have is for a nonprofit that I started back in May. And I'm going to give you kind of the generic without storytelling, and then the storytelling. And so obviously, as a nonprofit, we run completely off of donations that are coming in. And so generally what happens is without the story, you have a picture, or you have a sentence or two of the end result needed, and I need money, right? There's no story involved. For our nonprofit, what we do is we provide mobile services to homeless widows and fatherless on the street, right? So I can say that sentence and say, I need $50, right? Or our goal is $5,000, and that's without a story, but that's the opposite of what we do. So what we do is we call them meet and greets. And so it's where through our continued meetings on the streets and meeting individuals, we create relationships. And what happens is over time, we build such relationships that our neighbors, as we like to reference, is we build such relationships that we're on first name basis. We know our neighbors know us. And so what we want to do is we want to introduce our neighbors to the community. And so we're not servicing homeless widows and fatherless on the streets. We're servicing Jim. You see Jim over here? And Jim, and so generally what happens is we have a picture, and it says, meet Jim, and Jim lives in Fort Worth, And so now it's not, hey, I think I've seen a guy, or I think I've seen a lady before. No, it's, you see Jim over here? Do you see Sarah over here? Do you see the success? Do you see where they're at? And we invite that story, because now the story has a name. The person has a name. The person is relevant. Oh, they live over here. Oh, that's not too far from where I live. So now what it does is it creates an opportunity for the individual who's reading the story, hearing the story. It creates them to say, I know where that's at. I know somebody like Jim. I have a brother like Jim. and it creates that moment of we're not so different. And then that's where the buy-in happens. That's where the opportunity for relatability comes in.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's funny how you said that. It's, what you guys don't know about these podcasts is that we cover topics that we know a little bit about, but we also learn from these. So talking it out and talking together and preparing and planning and then sharing actually is very transformative for us too, by the way. In fact, when I go listen to our podcasts, frankly, I find it to be, very helpful too. So one of the things that you just said that I thought spoke to me was that, you essentially said people see themselves in the story. And I think that's a really another reason why people should be taking storytelling in sales, marketing, fundraising, business development, branding, all of that so seriously, is because people see themselves in the story, and that's the empathy. Yeah.
You're inviting, again, the whole purpose of the story is saying my story is similar to your story. And my big business, the business I'm just saying as a business, I'm a big business, but you see how my big business is made up of little businesses called people, and these little people are relatable. And can you relate to Alex, the cashier? You can. Okay, then you're going to come buy from me. And that's all because I took the time to share a story of that. I'm not just a big business trying to make money. I'm made up of little stories.
That's awesome. Very cool. Yeah, I like what you said too. You keep coming up with really good stuff that we didn't plan for, and that was another good one. So I really want to stop you. What I kind of was feeling from you is that you might be a big business. You don't have to feel big. And so if you unpack those little stories of those employees or your customers and you leverage that, now I can relate to you. Now I can see myself in the story versus if you're IBM or even if you're just a 150 person accounting firm, it's like, that's a lot, that's kind of a lot. Like, how do I relate to you unless I'm, you're doing my taxes or something, but I don't really relate. There's nothing human about that. Right. But if I hear about how Sharon, does X, Y, and Z in the community, and she actually, her favorite thing to do after work is to go do X, that's a story I can relate to. And so you're humanizing it, and I see myself in the story, or I see my mom in the story, or whatever it may be. So yeah, I like the fact that whatever size business that you are, I hope you guys kind of got what Beastmode is saying. Whatever size business you are, you're humanizing by pulling out stories, and you're making your business more relatable. So I have nothing to add. That was great.
Yeah. And one final thought that just kind of came to mind is, again, if you don't think that your business has a story, okay, or that it's not important, okay, look at how many businesses don't comment on certain topics. So 2 years ago or something, especially right here in Texas, I can remember there was a big deal about gender bathrooms and should we have 3 different bathrooms, and there's a lot of businesses who would not comment. Why would they not comment on it? Because of the story that it would tell about they were for, they were against, they were in the middle. And so, but that's a story, right? And so, but it's a negative story. But if you can see the value and the passion for not telling negative, that same passion needs to go into telling a positive story about who you are and what you do stand for.
Yeah. Yeah. You got to be careful because, especially on that topic, there are different reasons people have both sides of that. So yeah, make sure you understand and sometimes silence is golden. If you're, if you have, if that one can blow up on you, it can be the wisest thing to not share. But on the other hand, you want to be as inclusive as possible and do that in the safest possible way. So it's, these are about, the great thing is though, that sharing volunteering after work, that's not controversial. So you don't even have to worry about things that can cause you damage in your brand if you focus on, that type of story that it provides so much value. So I think we talked a little bit about some elements of storytelling there, and this is not, again, this is just me and Beastmode, given our perspective. So, you might say we missed one. We have no doubt we missed five. But what are some of the elements of storytelling?
Yes. So for me, the first element of story is that it has to start. Almost all good stories start negative, and we'll give you. I'm happy to give you plenty of examples. So Star Wars starts negative. The movie starts negative. The book starts negative. Lord of the Rings. The very first thing you see in the movie is you see the darkness, the fire erupting, and then it pans really quickly to the Shire, to where Bilbo and they're hanging out, and you're wondering, how do you get from this dark, explosive environment to this, grass is green and frolicking in the woods. And you have to have that darkness, that something that's going on. Number one, it grabs attention, right? So again, when you start a movie out, when you start a story out with something negative, it captures attention, but then it gives you the opportunity to come in with a bullet point number two, which is the obstacle to overcome. And so when you start negative and you start with, hey, your industry is losing $100,000 every quarter because of this. Whoa. Okay, I'm listening. Okay, now I'm coming in to say, okay, how do we stop this? This is a particular obstacle that we're up against. And now it gives me the opportunity to provide a solution, to provide that next strategy, which I think is point number three, not to jump too.
No, that's good. I think you should unpack it exactly like you did, and be as authentic and natural. So I love however it connects for you is perfectly fine with me. To me, a bad story, is kind of important because it shows the problem that you're solving, or it can highlight your brand. I really want to anonymize what I'm about to say because it's pretty close to home. But here's what I'll say. There's a company in the credit scoring industry, let's just say, and someone that I know got a job with this company and was diagnosed with cancer within 2 months, maybe within a month, and was going to have to go through treatment. By the way, this person's okay. But what happened with this is I was personal witness to how the company and how that boss treated this lady who went through this cancer journey, and how they accepted her, and they didn't regret that she would have to be out some for treatment, and that be a little bit disruptive to her early career with that company. If I told you who the brand was, I think your admiration for them would raise. But it started with a bad story, didn't it? Now she's okay.
Your
But
story of that story started.
What's that?
I said your story of that story started out negative. You didn't start the story say, hey, by the way, I want you to know this has a happy ending, and then come back and start negative. No, you started negative and came back in with the reminder, hey, this did happen, by the way.
Yeah, no, that's so good. And it's a true story. And it did start off very negative and scary and sad. And it also was scary and sad for someone who took a new job and had to have that honest moment with their boss. And then the way that the boss reacted with so much care and so much compassion and understanding spoke a volume for this brand. So there's so much that a bad story can be super effective to highlight how a brand or how a company or whatever, or a boss even, handled a situation. So yeah, I think a bad story can be really, really helpful. We also talked about a bad story during our prep of the context that in cybersecurity, just for example, back to my industry, we talked about what are some sources of stories. One of them is industry. In cybersecurity, you might just want to tell how this company got hacked, period. Equifax got hacked in 2017. I don't know what year it was. That might have been the year. I think it was the year. And it had, this many million of people were affected, and they had to provide blah 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 blah. And that will warn somebody else. So a bad story isn't all. It's a bad story. It doesn't have to be negative. It could be instructive.
Yeah. And I know one of our points that we're going to get to that I know that you feel a little bit more passionate about than I do, about how a story needs to go from bad to good. While I do believe that that is supremely helpful, I don't think that it's the only case.
Yeah.
Quite frankly, probably 50% of the time, whenever I'm telling a story, especially to a potential new customer, I'm telling a story about how your bad can get worse. And that if you don't change the fact that you're bleeding $100,000 a quarter, it's going to get worse. And if you don't take this solution, then it's only going to get worse. And so the story didn't get any better, you know? So
It's beautiful, because if you think about it, when you're talking to, we're talking about storytelling, but even when you go to your doctor, and they're telling you how bad can get worse. So you're absolutely right that your job as a marketer, or your job as a salesperson or business development, or a nonprofit owner, your job sometimes is to be an educator, and the education isn't all stars and flowers. Sometimes
yeah,
it's bad news, but you want to know bad news because you want to know the truth. But yeah, I'm going to shift over to the bad to good. So one of the options, and again, this is just a menu, so it's depending on the situation. But a bad to good is a nice vehicle. Beastmode thinks it's about 50% of the time. That may be the number, but it certainly is an option for you. So bad to good is just something like, hey, when Alan bought the cybersecurity solution, he had no visibility whatsoever. And they had public cloud, they had on premises, they had 2 data centers, they had 140 servers, they had 125 users. They had all this customer data that was at risk because they weren't monitoring from a cybersecurity end-to-end standpoint. And so that he was very worried about that. He brought in our solution. Now he has end-to-end coverage 24/7 with the best cybersecurity monitoring in the industry. And here's an example of how it helped him. And so there's a risky, non-covered, so kind of a bad to good, or a before and after. So you will find in sales and marketing, and in storytelling in your personal life too, that sometimes the bad to good is a very useful option for you to utilize.
I like the bad to good if the individual, the customer, the business that I'm speaking with can relate so strongly that they are then in turn more bought in to the end result. Because I can relate so strongly to who you're talking about. Maybe my problem isn't their problem. And so that I don't really relate with, but I relate with how similar we are. And I can so see that, so that I want the end result. And so the end result should just kind of be similar to me. I like that aspect. For somebody that I don't have a direct comparison to, I use the bad to bad. It's bad. It's going to get worse. And because again, the end result that we're looking for is action. And sometimes when you go to the doctor, if the doctor says, hey, you need a knee replacement, but you could probably wait, 3 or 4 years. You're not going to say, okay, well, schedule me for an appointment next week to get a surgery. No, because he just told you that you have time. But if he says you need a knee replacement, and if you don't do it within the next 3 months, you're going to be in a wheelchair for the rest of your life. Bad to bad. And you're going to say, okay, how quick can I get in here? I mean, just
No, it's really, really important. And people can also talk about you know just the good outcome. So sometimes there might be a situation. I just thought of this. There might be a situation where you just talk about the good, like, hey, this customer, I don't know what it would be, but there's a lot of ways to think about this. Depending on the examples that you have, depending on the goal outcome that you have. One of the things that we talked about in our prep was that it's really important that your story has a face. So I think we'll both probably share something on this, but I'll let you go first. What are you thinking about in terms of sharing with a face in your story?
yeah, so you can't anonymize your personal story or your business brand story. It needs to come with, this is who I am, this is who we are. And a lot of times it takes people out of their comfort zones. So for an example, there's a business that I've worked with before, and my suggestion to them, and they're in a very saturated field of construction, And I was very upfront. You have to be on the face of these ads, the owner, everybody. And he's more of a, I'm just a get my hands dirty kind of guy. I'm a nobody. I get it. But today you're somebody, because that's what separates this construction company from every other construction company is you. Okay. The end result may be similar. Your price may be similar, but the only thing that's 100% different is you. So you have to be here, and that's what's going to make everything different.
I could not agree more. I know this. So Beastmode and I are friends outside of the podcast, and I actually know this individual, and they've got a neat adoption thing going on. I mean, there's really neat stuff that I think a lot of people would be really interested in. So I totally agree that, putting a face on this story is important, and on the brand, is very important. I actually don't have a huge, I think some of the examples, when I talked about Alan, or I talked about that lady who got cancer or something, I've already shown probably enough for me in my contribution for this point. I've already shown a lot of faces. I talked about Lee Wilson and how he did so much for me early in my career when I was going to quit a job, and how he said he thought I could run the department. So I've already given you a lot of faces. So I think that the common thread that you'll see throughout our talk is that all of our stories had faces, and they're memorable. And so, there's a memorability that you get out of that. Alex from Target, it's a one that made you laugh, but it's a face that people could relate to. So yeah, couldn't agree more. And then I think you had a final point on the hero aspect, which I'll let you cover.
Yeah, there has to be defined roles. And a lot of this thought process comes from, and I just want to make sure that I'm giving credit where credit's due, comes from Donald Miller from StoryBrand. And so, but again, I know that I've thought about it and tried to expand on it. So hopefully it's fresh content, but you have to have defined roles. You have to know who I can relate to, right? Because if the story, or let's make it real generic, if the movie doesn't have a defined hero of somebody that I can relate with, I'm going to get up and walk out, because there's nothing that makes me think that, hey, I can be Vin Diesel and, and Fast and the Furious, and, I have a family and I could see how I would want to do this to overcome, whatever personal struggles or whatever. But if there's not a hero, if everybody's just in it to win it for themselves, or if everybody's just on the same team and there's no struggle, or there's no bad guy. If there's not a bad guy in the movie, I mean, no adults are watching little kids movies. And even in little kids movies, there's a bad guy who's coming to get, you have Donald Duck and Elmer Fudd. Elmer Fudd's a bad guy. He's trying to kill, Donald. That's just the way it works. There has to have that synergy for somebody to buy in. Whether it's I can relate to who the good guy is, or I don't like the bad guy. And there's plenty of movies out there who have a really, really awesome bad guy. And it's not because I can relate. It's I just don't like that person. And so I'm going to side with the good guy because that is so bad. Think about politics. Think about environment stuff. That's what they do. They pit global warming. This is bad. This is going to do this. And so whether you like this, whether you agree with how we're going to combat it, you can agree global warming's bad. So you're going to side with us.
Good.
My thoughts.
Love it. Well, thanks for hanging out.
Yeah. Thank you, everybody, for hanging out, tuning, and thank you for coming into our homes.
Absolutely. Well, we're going to have to think about next week in terms of what to cover. We don't have one planned for Stretching for Growth, so we might continue that. We may flip to a new topic, but thanks for joining us. If you have any questions, kind of the place that we currently have for questions or comments or any resources is the YouTube comments. So we do check those and respond to those. So feel free to comment that way. We'll probably set up an email address in the future. Just haven't done it yet. So yeah, definitely feel free to hit us up in the comments that way on YouTube. Where else can they find us?
Spotify, iTunes, any social media. We are there. And you know what? I would love to bring one of your guys' comments to the table here and roundtable it with Howie and just further that connection. So please do that. We'll see you next week.